On Saturday, Las Vegas hit 115 degrees. That is the hottest day the city has seen all year, just 1 degree short of an all-time record set back in 1979, and it capped off a stretch where the valley had spent most of the previous week sitting above 110 degrees day after day, with almost no let-up. Cooling stations opened across the valley. The extreme heat warning stayed in effect through Wednesday. And for days, the story was simple, dangerous, punishing heat with almost no relief, even after dark. Now the forecast is finally starting to ease. Highs are expected to slide back toward 100 to 105 degrees by the weekend, a number that would have felt brutal in May, but now, after a week like this one, reads almost like relief. After a week like this one, that sounds like nothing but good news. It is not that simple, because the exact same weather pattern that finally breaks a desert, heat wave like this one is also the pattern that opens the door to something else entirely. Sudden thunderstorms, flash flooding, and walls of dust that can drop visibility on the highway to 0 in seconds without much warning at all. In Las Vegas, in the middle of monsoon season, a heat wave does not just end. It transitions into a completely different kind of danger, one that catches far more people off guard than the heat itself does. If stories like this genuinely interest you, hit the like button. It helps more than you'd think, and subscribe so you catch the next one. Here is what you're about to learn. What is actually happening in the atmosphere as this heat wave finally breaks. Why the desert Southwest turns the end of a heat wave into flash flood and dust storm season almost every single time. Why the nights remain dangerous even after the daytime numbers start looking normal again. And why forecasters are already eyeing the next possible flare-up before this one has even fully cleared out. What the heat breaking actually means in the desert. A ridge of high pressure has been parked over the Southwest for more than a week, the same dome of stable, sinking air responsible for nearly every major heat wave the region sees each summer, from the Mojave to the Great Basin. High pressure like this does two things at once. It compresses and warms the air as it sinks, and it suppresses the normal daily buildup of clouds and thunderstorms, keeping skies relentlessly clear and the sun beating down uninterrupted, day after day. That is why this stretch produced highs in the 110s, with almost no cloud cover to slow it down. When forecasters say the heat is going to break, what they mean is that ridge is finally weakening and sliding east. The same shift that has driven this summer's dangerous heat from one region to the next since June. As that high pressure loses its grip on southern Nevada, two things change simultaneously. Temperatures drop because the sinking, compressing air that was driving the heat is no longer parked overhead. And the atmospheric lid that had been suppressing thunderstorm development for days finally lifts, because that same ridge was the very thing keeping monsoon moisture from organizing into storms in the first place. Think of the ridge as a heavy stone lid sitting on top of a pot that has been quietly building pressure underneath. As long as the lid stays in place, nothing escapes, and the temperature underneath just keeps climbing. The moment that lid is lifted off, even partially, everything that built up beneath it does not simply drift away calmly. It tends to come out fast because it was never given a gradual way to release. A heat wave that ends cleanly, with a gentle push of cool, dry air and nothing more, is actually closer to the exception in this part of the country during monsoon season than it is the rule. That second part is the trap. The heat wave was not simply blocking rain by coincidence. It was actively holding back moisture that had been building nearby the entire time, and once that block is gone, all of it tends to arrive at once. Why ending the heat wave means starting the storm season. Las Vegas sits on the northern edge of the North American Monsoon, a seasonal shift that runs roughly from mid-July through the end of September, driven by moist air pulled north from the Gulf of California and Mexico. Through most of this summer, that moisture has been sitting just south and east of the valley, waiting for an opening. Forecasters have described entire weeks this season where monsoon moisture was, in their words, locked in place near southern Nevada, capable of producing storms, but held back by the same high pressure ridge responsible for the heat itself. Southern Nevada's weekly weather webinars through July repeatedly frame this as a pattern of two competing forces sitting almost on top of each other. Extreme heat holding one part of the region in its grip, while moisture-fueled storm chances linger just outside it, with the exact balance shifting by only a few miles some weeks, and forecasters cautioning residents not to assume their neighborhood's forecast applied a few exits down the freeway. The moment that ridge finally breaks down, the cap comes off entirely. Warm moisture, rich air that has been building for days suddenly has room to rise. And rising moist air over hot desert terrain is exactly the recipe for fast, intense thunderstorm development. This is why the National Weather Service's Las Vegas office has spent much of this summer alternating between extreme heat warnings and flash flood outlooks almost back to back. Because in this region, those two hazards are not separate stories. They are two phases of the exact same weather pattern. The storms that follow a heat wave's collapse tend to be more violent, not less. than an average monsoon thunderstorm. All that trapped moisture and heat represents stored energy, and when the cap finally lifts, the atmosphere releases it quickly rather than gradually. The same way, a stretch of unusually calm weather often precedes the most intense storms rather than the mildest ones. Meteorologists in the region have already tracked this pattern play out multiple times this season. Intense heat building for days, followed by a sudden burst of thunderstorms capable of dangerous lightning, gusty outflow winds, and localized flash flooding within a very short window. Why the desert makes this specific combination so dangerous? A thunderstorm dropping heavy rain in a place with soft, absorbent soil is a very different event than the same storm dropping rain onto hard desert ground. Southern Nevada's soil is dense, dry, and compacted after months without meaningful rainfall, which means it absorbs almost none of a sudden downpour. Instead of soaking in, the water runs off immediately, funneling into the valley's washes, storm channels, and low-lying roads, where it can rise from dry to dangerous in a matter of minutes. Local fire departments run swift water rescue training specifically for this scenario every year, because it happens reliably enough to plan around. And emergency officials have issued public warnings throughout this monsoon season specifically about the danger of underestimating fast-moving water in a normally bone-dry channel into the valley's washes, storm channels, and low-lying roads, where it can rise from dry to dangerous in a matter of minutes. Local fire departments run swift water rescue training specifically for this scenario every year, because it happens reliably enough to plan around, and emergency officials have issued public warnings throughout this monsoon season specifically about the danger of underestimating fast-moving water in a normally bone-dry channel. There is a second hazard layered on top of the flooding risk, and it is one visitors to the region are far less prepared for than locals. Dust storms, sometimes intense enough to qualify as haboobs, driven by the powerful outflow winds that spill out ahead of a collapsing thunderstorm. These walls of dust can reduce visibility on highways like Interstate 15 to near zero in a matter of seconds, catching drivers completely off guard on a road they may have been cruising down under clear skies just minutes earlier. Southern Nevada has already seen multiple dust events this summer tied directly to storm outflow, including one that knocked out power across parts of Henderson and East Las Vegas after arriving with almost no warning, and another that blanketed the Eastern Valley while the rest of the region stayed completely dry and sunny only a few miles away. This is precisely why the transition out of a heat wave tends to catch more people off guard than the heat wave itself. Extreme heat. Warnings come with days of advance notice, cooling centers, and constant public messaging repeated across news broadcasts and phone alerts. A sudden downburst, producing a dust wall or a flash flood in a normally dry wash, can develop and strike within an hour, often just as residents and visitors are finally relaxing because the worst of the heat appears to be over, the trap hiding in the nighttime numbers. Even setting the storms aside entirely, the heat itself is not finished the moment daytime highs start easing. Throughout this heat wave, meteorologists flagged the overnight lows as the bigger concern, not the afternoon peaks, because temperatures were failing to drop below 90 degrees in many parts of the valley, compared to a typical summer low, closer to 83. That matters enormously for public health, because the human body needs a real nighttime cooldown to recover from a day of extreme heat exposure. And without one, heat-related illness risk keeps compounding night after night, even if daytime numbers look less alarming on paper. Heat remains the single deadliest weather hazard in the United States, killing more people in an average year than hurricanes, tornadoes, and flooding combined, and a large share of that toll comes specifically from nights that never provide real relief, not just from the daytime peak. Everyone tends to focus on when the warnings finally get lifted. As the system breaks down, daytime highs will fall first and fastest, while overnight lows tend to lag behind, staying elevated for longer because the same lingering monsoon humidity that fuels the storms also traps warmth after dark. That gap is exactly where the false sense of relief creeps in. A headline temperature of 102 instead of 115 feels like an obvious improvement, and in the most immediate sense it is, but a muggy 90-degree night immediately afterward, combined with a sudden thunderstorm rolling through, is its own distinct hazard that a simple daytime high does not capture at all. Anyone without reliable access to air conditioning, and Clark County's cooling centers exist specifically for that population, remains at real risk even on a day the extreme heat warning has technically expired. What comes after this particular break is still uncertain. Extended forecasts covering the back half of this month show the underlying pattern easing only modestly, with afternoon highs expected to hover in the low to mid 100s, rather than the 115-degree extremes of this past weekend, and forecasters noting that confidence in the outlook drops considerably beyond about a week out. Some longer-range signals hint at the ridge rebuilding and pushing back toward the southwest later in August, which would mean this cool down is a pause rather than the end of the season's heat entirely, echoing a pattern that has already repeated itself more than once across the western United States this summer. Extended outlooks this far out are inherently uncertain, and forecasters are careful to frame any mid to late August heat resurgence as a possibility worth watching rather than a locked-in certainty, since small shifts in exactly where a rebuilding ridge settles can mean the difference between another punishing heat wave and a comparatively mild stretch. None of this is cause for panic, but it is a reason for a very specific kind of caution that a simple drop in the daily high does not communicate on its own. The safest response to a heat wave breaking in the desert Southwest is not to relax the moment the extreme heat warning expires. It is to watch the sky, respect the washes, keep an eye on outflow winds building on the horizon, and remember that, in Las Vegas, calm weather and dangerous weather are often separated by nothing more than a single afternoon. If this changed how you think about what actually happens when a desert heat wave ends, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are more videos on the screen if you want to keep exploring. Here's a question worth sitting with. Do you think most people underestimate the flash flood and dust storm risk that follows a heat wave, or has enough of the public caught on by now that these warnings actually change behavior? Let me know in the comments.